On this day in gaming,
64 became the most brutally annoying number ever. September 29th, 1996, one of the most pivotal home video game consoles launched, and officially marked a transition for not only Nintendo, but the entire industry and entertainment medium. Talk about epic. An entire year earlier, Sony had released the PlayStation, an edgy console that went the road that Sega took years earlier when it was battling to dismantle Nintendo as leader in the manufacturing market. And that strategy was maturity. Gamers were older, moving on from Mario. The platformer was about to enter its last days as the shooter was supplanting the genre as the default game type by popular decree. And in every other way, Sony's stellar system represented the future of gaming. The Nintendo Ultra 64, as it had been dubbed in its early marketing tiers, was in a precarious position. After waging years of open warfare with Sega and the greatest console conflict since the Atari and Intellivision had butted heads in the early 80s, Nintendo was fatigued of fighting. The Super Nintendo, only late in its lifespan, was able to ultimately be proclaimed victor over its arch-nemesis, the Genesis. But just as Nintendo seemed to secure their status as industry trailblazer once and for all, here was yet another Japanese company throwing their haughty hat into the crowded ring. The PlayStation's bullet points were intimidating to the big N. Its games were on CD-ROMs, meaning that they could hold a lot more space than the conventional cartridges of old, an obsolete technology that the N64 had carelessly clung on to. I mean, sure, the cartridge was more durable, and it wasn't as easy to pirate as a disc, but it just didn't have enough memory for developers like Square, whose ambitious resolve to create massive worlds was aroused by constantly evolving technology, to be enticed to stay on board for the next go-round. Square would say so long to Nintendo, and they weren't the only ones. Paired with the company's scrutinized licensing policy, of which developers were limited to making so many games a year, a massive loss of third-party support seriously helped Sony and seriously hurt Nintendo, leaving the N64 with a much smaller library than the PlayStation, comprised mostly of first- and second-party games. So how exactly did the system stay afloat against this new beast of a rival? Well, it just so happens that this slimmer catalog would come to feature some of the greatest and most influential titles of all time. As the platformer golden age of the late 80s and early 90s was wearing out, Nintendo revitalized the genre by perfecting control in a 3D rendered space. Super Mario 64 and a dozen other derivatives exploited the child's chaotically kinetic nature, the fascination with freedom of movement in this open world that was no longer constricted to horizontal planes. Meanwhile, the next installment of The Legend of Zelda became one of the most critically acclaimed titles ever, boasting a massive organic world and epic story that proved to be the smug smile to Square and all those who had doubted what was still possible on a cartridge. And then, of course, Rareware was vindicating its value to Nintendo, revolutionizing the first-person shooter, confirming the genre's potential on the home hardware, and giving the N64 what it sorely needed, an amount of adulthood so as not to alienate Big Brother. Despite its impressive archive, however, and despite selling 500,000 units in a few months, the Nintendo 64 was the official end of the Titan's reign as frontrunner in video games. The corporation had staved off Sega, but this second war was too much. Nintendo was no longer king. It had clung to an old order, quickly becoming obsolete, while the PlayStation was embracing the future. Again, the N64 had some of the greatest games, including a monopoly on the control-perfect platformer. But its weak support, its infrequency of game releases, and its technical inadequacies marked the end for the N's days as industry sovereign. In a rare moment, let me shed the objectivity of this day in gaming and reveal that this was the console I did grow up with and easily have the fondest memories. It may go down as the generational system that witnessed the ultimate decline of the Nintendo that had permeated every avenue of our culture, but it's still an awesome console that left a legacy when it came to North America, September 29th, 1996.